I'm going to begin with a very quick introduction. So I'm Karen Mundy, the Chief Technical Officer here at GPE. And today we're going to hear from colleagues at USAID about the Global Book Fund Initiative, which has been supported by USAID, NORAD, and DFID. And it is an initiative that GPE has been active in and following very closely. A group of those agencies commissioned a report from Results for Development in July 2015, and this report was completed in February 2016 and is now available, and we will send a link to that report for you after the webinar. We're going to have three presentations and then an opportunity in between each for questions, and then a final wrap-up set of questions. Penelope Bender is here with us from USAID. She's going to give us an overview of the Global Book Fund, which has many parts to it, and you'll see as she goes through some of those different components. I would just highlight that in particular, and from a GPE point of view, a very important part of the Global Book Fund initiative relates to what I would call value for money. That is, how can we get more value for money in the purchase of textbooks? This is an issue that developing country partners raise. We know that we spend a very significant portion of GP funds on books. And so how do we get better books into the hands of children at a more reasonable cost? A unit cost, I think, is one of the central and driving issues taken up in the Global Book Fund work. We've got Shubha Jayaram from R4D. He will actually present the findings of the R4D Feasibility Study. And then Anthony Bloom from USAID will talk about the All Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development Initiative, which is one of the components of the Global Book Fund initiative. And then at the end, Penelope will come back and talk a little bit about some of the next steps, including some opportunities for participants in the call to be involved in these next steps. So again, if you are on WebEx or phone or computer, make sure to mute your mic. Of course, make sure to unmute your mic if you want to ask questions. We are suggesting that you send questions using the chat function in WebEx, and our team here will provide those questions in written format to the presenters. But you can also signal that you want to speak up. I will open the floor for questions after each presentation. So with that, turn over to Penelope.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks very much, and welcome to everyone who's joined us online. I would like to thank GPE for hosting this webinar. We're really glad to be here. As Karen mentioned, GPE has been very involved in the development of the book fund concept to date, so it's great to be able to share the ideas and the activities with everyone who's joined. The Global Book Fund is a multi-partner initiative that's been developed over the last few years, involving development partners, governments, and the private sector, with the objective of transforming the way we develop, finance, and distribute books, building on commodity reforms in other sectors, particularly commodity reforms in health. Today's presentations are an introduction to the Global Book Fund, its partners and activities, and I hope that everyone will join in with questions so we can have a good discussion, and then we can continue the discussion after the webinar. So we all know about the global learning crisis. The Education for All Global Monitoring Report in 2013 told us that at least 250 million children around the world are not learning the basics in reading and mathematics, and that 130 million of those children are actually in school, but still not learning. Now, through SDG discussions, when we go out to classrooms, we see the same thing. Classroom after classroom of students who are struggling to learn to read, struggling to read to learn, even in the upper primary grades. We know that books are essential for improving learning. Together with teaching and teachers, books are the tools that power student learning outcomes. There are multiple studies that have shown this, a wide range of data showing how important books are This includes textbooks and other kinds of books like the readers that students need for instruction and practice. We also know that many of the countries we work with, many of the programs we support have classrooms where students do not have access to books. These numbers are from SACMEC for Southern and Eastern Africa and show that we have a wide range, with about half of students in Mozambique having access to a book, down to about 4% of students in Tanzania. And again, these are for textbooks. The situation is much more dire for the other books that we know that students need for practice. So even when books are in schools, we still have issues around the kinds of books that are there and access to them. As we've done analysis over the last few years, we've seen that all the links of the book chain are broken. Title development. We work in many very large languages that have no titles for students in the early grades and few titles for students in the later grades. Even when we do have books, as we saw in the previous slide, there aren't enough books to go around. It's hard to access the books. Procurement is very fragmented. We have governments procuring books. We have development partners procuring books, different times, different suppliers, different durations, and very unpredictable. So it's very difficult for the private sector to invest since procurement is so unpredictable. We also have a lot of issues around book financing. Prices vary widely from one part of the world to another. We see huge differences from, for example, between West Africa and between Asia, huge differences in prices. And the financing itself is also unpredictable. We also have serious problems around supply chains and supply chain management. The World Bank did a study last year that came out last July showing that in some countries, up to 50% of books are going missing between the point of production and the point of use, the school. So you can imagine that's just a tremendous loss of funding and a tremendous loss of opportunity to learn for students. The bank study also found what many of us already knew and live every day, that the situation is not improving, even though we have decades of government and development partner funding. We still see the same situation in classrooms. So as I mentioned before, the Book Fund aims to build on commodity reform in other sectors. Like in other sectors, we know that new products are required and we need to invest in R&D. We know that right now we have a lot of small purchasers, which produces low purchasing power, increased costs. Unpredictable demand also raises costs. We have serious market failures leading to insufficient access and costs again. Supply chain management issues leading to tremendous wastage. And underdeveloped technical specifications. We have a wide variety of technical specifications, even within development partners. Even within countries, particular countries, different partners use different technical specifications, which have not been maximized either for cost or for quality. So again, the objective of the Global Book Fund is to transform book development, meaning title development, financing and procurement, and distribution, which is supply chain management, to ensure that children have the books that they need. There are a number of ongoing activities within the Global Book Fund. The Global Book Fund is actually a sort of a family or a suite of activities of which the fund is only one part. There are many other activities across the book chain from title development to use. So currently, we are working on an initiative called Enabling Writers to increase titles in underserved languages. My colleague Tony Bloom will talk about that in a few minutes. We're working on title access through a global reading repository, which will allow countries to use books cross-border or cross-project or program. Far too often, we're finding that books developed under one project are not available to the next project, or books developed in a language like Hausa, which is used in Nigeria, are not available for work in Hausa in a neighboring country like Niger. So that's an attempt to make books much more accessible. We're working on materials inventories. We've conducted 11 inventories in Africa to give us a better idea of what books exist, how they're licensed, and how much they cost. Those inventories showed that we have languages of more than 10 million speakers with very few books for the early grades. We're working on licensing to increase the use of open licensing to make materials more available. Feasibility studies and business case development, which Shubha will talk about more in a minute. A lot of work is now underway on supply chain management, tracing books from point of production to point of use, but also things like quantification and forecasting and stock management at the school level. We're also about to issue a call for proposals for a World Bank trust fund called the REACH Trust Fund, where funding will be available to start country-level book fund activities. I'm going to talk about that much more in the second session, where I'll be talking about next steps for the book fund. But development partners, governments, NGOs, firms, and others will have access to these funds, will be able to write proposals in order to start these activities. And we're also working on improving the use of books through the programs that we run at USAID and that our partners run in many countries. There are a lot of ways that you can get involved. I will talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but we have run many global and regional book fund concept development meetings. Those are continuing. Enabling Writers is being rolled out as we speak, the repository, track and trace, and then the REACH Trust Fund proposals. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleague Shubha, but if you need more information, my contact information is on the screen, and please do contact me. Thank you. Shubha, do you want to go ahead and talk about the feasibility study and the major findings?
Sounds good. Thanks, Penelope and Karen. Let me just pull it up. Let me know as soon as you can see it. Great. Great. Hopefully you can see the presentation now.
We weren't seeing.
Shubha, the screen went black.
It was
It was up a minute ago.
Is it? Can you see it now?
No.
So maybe you want to try share my screen, if that works. Oh, there you go. There
Now
it is.
you're back. Hi, Shubha.
Hi.
It's not back.
You want to try sharing your screen one more time.
Okay, let me try again. Does that work?
Now you can click on the PowerPoint. You can show the display mode. So if you are familiar, yeah.
Does that work?
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So as Penelope said, let me go ahead and get started. So hi everybody, good to meet you all virtually. I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about the findings and recommendations from the Global Book Fund Feasibility Study. So as Penelope mentioned, results for development and IE partners, we kicked off work in June of last year to try to better understand what were the inefficiencies in the book's value chain and the potential feasibility and opportunities for a global book fund. So we conducted 13 different country studies. We interviewed more than 300 stakeholders altogether, so including printers and publishers, implementers, donors, etc., to better understand what are the challenges in the market and what is the feasibility for a potential global book fund type entity. So I'm going to be sharing very briefly a few of our findings and a few of our recommendations and options for this global book fund. So the findings from our study were structured along 4 lines of inquiry, and I'm going to be going through each of these in turn now. So the first is around demand planning and financing of books. So our consultations and our interviews showed a lack of awareness on the value of books, specifically reading books in mother tongue or local languages that correspond to languages of instruction. So the value of books was not there from parents, from communities, and even from governments themselves sometimes. And so that obviously constrains demand. And so that to us, and that showed a fundamental challenge with the value of reading books is simply not seen. The second point is really around the lack of data on book provision. So our analysis showed that there's a lack of data, which makes it very hard to plan. It makes it very hard to assess progress. It makes it very hard to mobilize resources if we don't know what books are there in what languages in what schools. Our analysis showed that in terms of financing, in order to meet minimum book standards at pre-primary and primary level, $3.1 billion to $3.9 billion must be spent annually. And we assumed for these minimum book standards, we assumed 5 textbooks per pupil per grade and 1 reading book per pupil per week. So that's really just very, very bare minimum standards, but you can see that that's still a tremendous amount of funding that is needed to be spent annually. And corresponding with that is finding 4. You can see there we saw that there was a significant funding gap and underfunding. And importantly, there's no funding really for reading books specifically. So oftentimes there may be a nominal line item for textbooks, but this is not really there for reading books in many, many countries. Importantly, I should add that we found that in some cases, it became crucial to increase spending efficiency. So not just the absolute amount of funds, but the way in which funds were spent. Next, in terms of procurement and production of books, we found that, as Penelope mentioned earlier, just a low availability and supply of books. And this is due to a mix of factors. And this was true across the 13 countries that we studied. And this was due to low awareness of books, limited authorship capacity, lack of content sharing. And we found that although some countries have made improvements, the inadequate supply is specifically true for reading books. So although there may be some textbooks, there is not reading books in classrooms. We also found that procurement is not efficient and it's often poor value for money. So there is often no economies of scale, so purchasing is not done in bulk, inefficient specifications, and unpredictable demand. And I'll be talking a little bit about this later, but specifically the lack of bulk purchasing makes it very poor value for money because economies of scale can't be reached and optimal prices are not seen in the market. Importantly, I should add that our analysis looked not just at print textbooks, but we also considered digital reading books as well. In our study of digital versus print, we found that based on a library model, so unstructured reading, digital reading books, digital reading programs are about 12 to 13 times more expensive than print if you're considering an unstructured reading model. But for more structured reading programs where every child is reading the same book, digital programs may be less expensive and may offer promise. Our analysis in the study of digital materials also looked at technical barriers and challenges, and we found that there are a significant number of technical barriers and operational challenges to scaling up digital materials. However, we should add that progress is being made, and in some circumstances, particularly in certain contexts or in terms of particular types of disabled children and such, digital books certainly hold a lot of promise. Next, in terms of supply chain management and usage of books, so these last 2 lines of inquiry, we found that there are massive challenges here, and again, many of this is known to all of us. And supply chain challenges included weak demand forecasting, poor management systems, inefficient distribution. And in fact, distribution is the largest source of inefficiency. And it's often a lack of accountability mechanisms in many countries that constrain efficient and accountable distribution. Importantly, we found that ICT can play a role in increasing efficiencies in supply chain management. And Tony will be speaking a little bit more about the role ICT can play in this regard later on in this webinar. Lastly, we focused on usage, and we found that book provision does not equal usage. And so just because books are there in a classroom, it doesn't mean the books are being adequately used by teachers to boost literacy. And we found that often teachers are unaware of how to appropriately use books in the classroom and how to set up and run school and classroom libraries. And this holds true for both print books as well as, of course, digital books. And so I'm going to briefly describe some of the recommendations for the Global Book Fund type entity that our team proposed. So we proposed that the Global Book Fund could play 4 roles, 2 at the country level and 2 at the global level, to support increased access and provision of all books. And I'm going to be going through each of these 4 in turn now. So the first proposed function is around the Global Book Fund serving as a vehicle to develop and disseminate knowledge and best practices. And here we see 4 roles that the GBF could play. First is around generating and disseminating knowledge. The second is around coordinating donor and partner efforts and increasing synergies. During our consultations, we often heard that even in one country, oftentimes partners are unaware of different programs happening to support literacy, to support increased book provision, etc. So that coordination we see is very much as a need. The third is around facilitating content sharing and housing initiatives such as the Global Reading Repository. And again, we'll be sharing more about the Global Reading Repository later on in this webinar. And the fourth component of function 1 is around convening stakeholders, so institutionalizing workshops and forums and facilitating regular dialogue and lesson sharing across the book chain. The second proposed function at the global level is around advocacy efforts, and indeed this could complement country and national efforts as well. And the key purpose of this advocacy function is to address the fundamental lack of awareness and the lack of value placed on reading books. And we thought it was absolutely crucial that we address this value gap and raise the importance of books, specifically of reading books and textbooks, and specifically also in local languages as well. We thought it's crucial to engage and inform parents and communities, and this in turn can then influence policymakers and create a longer-term policy dialogue about the importance of books to bolster literacy. The third proposed function is at the country level. So at the country level, we proposed that the Global Book Fund could fund technical assistance to improve book development, procurement, distribution, and usage. We propose that technical assistance be funded on a needs-driven basis. And importantly, we propose that the Global Book Fund provide, but not assume responsibility itself for the technical services, so that this GBF type entity can be as lean and nimble as possible. We also propose that flexible programmatic funding is used to bolster the demand side and ensure that books are used effectively to increase learning in the classroom. And we've been drawing from lessons from the health side over the course of pulling together these recommendations. And you can see on the slide that the RMNCH Trust Fund, as well as SHI's Unitaid, uses similar mechanisms of flexible program funding and technical assistance to support their programs as well. And lastly, we recognize that in some countries, there will be a need for the Global Book Fund to directly fund reading books. In such countries, we propose that the GBF provide multi-year funding to supplement government resources and, importantly, increase demand predictability. Stakeholders that we interviewed also spoke of the need to strengthen local publishing for long-term sustainability. Importantly, we recommended that the government would need to contribute financially and commit to best practices. And this could include pool procurement at the national level to increase economies of scale and increase efficiencies. And of course, in certain circumstances where necessary, the GBF could directly procure themselves, for instance, in emergency contexts or where government procurement capacity is absent. But we do emphasize that in some countries, the GBF will need to fund books itself, particularly, for instance, in low-income countries. Over the course of our analysis, we also looked at 5 structural and operational considerations and issues. I'm not going to be covering them in depth in this presentation, but just very briefly, you can see the 5 on the screen. The first is around the funding and implementation model. And so we examine questions and issues such as the proposal process, the type of financing that would be provided, etc. The second consideration we looked at was around institutional structure and governance of this global book fund type entity. We proposed hosting the GBF within an existing institution for both cost efficiencies as well as to leverage existing programs and existing efforts around books and literacy. The third is around country co-financing, and we looked at this issue as being very important to build national ownership and sustainability. And some of the questions we raised around country financing was around ability to pay and how the GBF would consider different countries' ability to pay when thinking about co-financing mechanisms. The fourth is around eligibility, graduation, and allocation across countries. And so we looked at questions such as eligibility criteria. So for instance, what countries would be eligible for funding, as well as eligibility for broad technical assistance versus more limited for direct funding. So in what cases would the GBF support TA versus direct funding of books themselves? And the last consideration we examined was monitoring and evaluation and accountability. And we emphasized the need for robust M&E systems as well as strong country M&E systems as well. And all of these 5 considerations are explored in more depth in the main report. And so with that, I'll conclude and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So thank you, and I think what we're going to do, I'm on.
Q&A, yeah.
Yeah, yep. The mic is on. Okay, so we're going to turn now to question and answer, and have we received any written questions?
So far, no.
So we haven't received any written comments, but I'd like to open the floor now to invite you all to ask any questions you might have about the presentation. So please make sure to state your name. Somebody's turned on their mic, so if you want to step in.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, somebody has opened their mic, so we're hearing a lot of background noise. Could you please mute your mic? Hello?
Maybe we can do the questions by chat.
Okay, could I ask everybody to please turn your mics on mute?
Hi, yes.
Okay, I think we're having some trouble right now, so please everybody, if you have a question, please use the chat function and turn your mics on mute.
Yes, I am.
Hello?
Yes,
We're still hearing an awful lot of background noise. Can you please put... Very good. Thank you. We have solved that problem, and we're receiving our first question. Maybe you just want to read it out.
Give me a second, please. Okay. So the first question is, how would the fund work with GPE? Would it be funded through GPE? That's the one question. The second question is, when would it start working?
Can you tell us where the questions have come from?
Yes.
Okay, so the first question was asked by Heather Saunders.
Heather.
Yeah, and the second question, again by her. Yeah, by Heather.
So the first question is, would it be funded by GPE?
How would
it be funded?
Work with GPE?
Okay.
Would it be funded through GPE?
Right.
So there's 2 questions.
I'll answer that question. And when it would start, I think Penelope can better
I can talk about
answer.
that, and I can talk a little about the first one too.
At the moment, we have not raised the question of whether this the Global Book Fund would be taken on board as part of the activities that GPE itself carries out. However, within the Secretariat, we've been active in following the development of the Book Fund initiative, and we do anticipate considering it or bringing it to the board for consideration at some point over the course of the next year. But we are very much waiting for the finalization of the feasibility study and the opportunity to talk with some of the partners who funded the original feasibility study, since they will also be principals or board members of GPE itself. So we're waiting for some more consultation with our board members before we would move forward. I'll just say that from a technical point of view, this is not, because it's really up to the board to push this forward, but from a technical point of view, I think that you can see some of the lock-ins to some of the work that GPE has said it would develop under its Strategy 2020. So first of all, we've said we would expand our knowledge good practice exchange role, and clearly there's a lock into that part of the Global Book Fund initiative. And then secondly, in the area of procurement, you might imagine GPE has a role to play insofar as it brings together many of the bilateral donors who are funding the purchase of textbooks, and so it could play a coordinating role on the procurement side. But the board has not given this any attention so far, apart from the fact that many of our board members, or several of our board members, have been involved in the actual working group that has supported the feasibility study. Penelope?
Thanks, Karen. Yes, so as Karen said, over the last few years, we've been doing a lot of technical work to really develop the case for the Global Book Fund and to mobilize support at the country level, regional level, and the global level. So it's now that the feasibility study is being finalized. There will actually be a small phase 2 of the feasibility study, which will spend some additional time looking at structure and governance. And it's at that point where we'll start to think about formalizing relationships, having discussions with the GPE board, and so on. In terms of when the Global Book Fund will start working, it's already working. So there are many activities running on different timelines, and there are many ways in which partners and colleagues could get involved even now. So, for example, title development, title access, all of this work is ongoing at the moment, and when we come towards the end of the webinar, I'll give some dates and some locations for some activities where you can join. In terms of the actual financing for country-level activities, books and related activities in countries, the call for proposals for the REACH Trust Fund will go out at the end of May or beginning of June, and we expect those proposals to be awarded over the summer months into the early fall. And so that will be the startup of pilot country-level activities. The fund itself, financing mechanism, the way financing will flow, that's something that we'll be developing during phase 2 of the feasibility study. Are there any other questions?
Yes. So the next question is for Penelope from Rudy Klaas. And the question is, IEFG recently held an education commission in April 27. The summary notes say of using national or local languages that this is perhaps only vogue of USAID now. Would you agree with this?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So the IEFG recently held an education commission in April 27.
Mm-hmm.
The summary notes say of using national or local languages. That this is perhaps only, I can't get this word, vogue of USAID.
In vogue from USAID.
Yes. Would you agree with this?
So I think what they're basically asking, and Klaus, you might clarify if we're not understanding well what your question is, but I think the question basically is, has the momentum for mother tongue literacy and instruction been lost at the global level And the IEFG is the International Education Funders Group, which is the cluster of philanthropies working in education. So they recommended this, I think, as one of the key areas that need attention. And I guess the question, Penelope, is whether or not USAID, I know, remains a very strong advocate for mother tongue instruction, but has the momentum internationally dropped? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say definitely not. This is an issue I've been working on for a long time, and I would say that there's more momentum and more interest and more work on mother tongue, particularly for early reading acquisition, than I've seen since I started working in this area. So we actually have very few countries now that are using second languages of instruction from day one of grade one. We're seeing a widespread use of mother tongue and widespread demand for mother tongue in almost every country where we work. All right, I think we have to move on.
Should we do one more question
Sure.
and then we'll move on?
All right, so it's the last question anyways. So the question is from Alexandra Galitsky. Could you once again explain the relationship between the GBF and the REACH Trust Fund?
The GPE and the REACH Trust Fund?
GBF.
Oh, the Global Book Fund and the REACH Trust Fund. Okay.
Okay, so if it's all right, why don't we hold that question
Yes.
for later, because I am going to explain the REACH Trust Fund in some detail in the second session.
Good. So I think we'll turn now over to Tony, and Tony is going to present about some of the technology-based interventions that have been supported by the All Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development initiative, which is part of this broader suite of activities around the Global Book Fund. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for GPE for hosting us this morning, and greetings to those that are calling in, either good morning or good afternoon or good evening. So I'm happy to elaborate on some of the All Children Reading Grand Challenge activities that are contributing to the overall Global Book Fund initiative. I should mention that the All Children Reading Grand Challenge is a partnership-driven initiative with three major co-funding partners. It's USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. We also have a variety of other partners we're working with in our grant and prize activities. The general premise of the All Children Reading Grand Challenge is how can you use science and technology in this particular context to improve the efficiency and effectiveness uses of technology to accelerate early grade reading. We're really excited because through grant and prize models and three focal areas, local language, family and community engagement, and disability, we're exploring both cost-effective, sustainable, and scalable uses of technology, while also sort of balancing that with attracting innovation from a variety of sources, and some of whom are beyond the traditional usual applicants of grant and prize competitions that USAID and the other partners convene. In specific context of the Global Book Fund, we're really excited to be proactively contributing overall to the Global Book Fund initiative, and encourage a variety of other organizations to contribute technically, financially, and a variety of other modalities as well. As both Karen and Penelope have indicated, there's a variety of initiatives that are part of the Global Book Fund, but truly the success and impact will come from a variety of partners that contribute to the overall endeavor. And you may have some particular areas of expertise that you want to add value to in that regard. I will talk specifically about three activities that we are contributing in terms of the overall Global Book Fund initiative that you've heard referenced to all three. I'll go in a little bit more depth and then happy to elaborate in terms of Q&A. So I'll talk first about the Enabling Writers software, next about the Global Reading Repository, and finally about Track and Trace. So the first prize competition that the All Children Reading Grand Challenge ran, about 2 years ago when we first launched the prize competition, was looking specifically at this area of how can you make it easier for local authors or a variety of other stakeholders to produce local language materials. And what we were looking for through that prize competition was software that could be used in low bandwidth environments, so have a light touch that could run on a variety of platforms, but really help in the course of a writer's workshop or other endeavors, help local authors produce leveled and decodable readers. So we're really excited that through that prize competition, we were able to provide the award to SIL Lead, which has a long track record of working in the space of local languages, and through which to build upon their Bloom software. I will say that the software is available on a variety of sites, both the Global Reading Network, the All Children Reading Grand Challenge, through the Bloom library itself, and also through GitHub. It's open source software, and we encourage organizations to download it and to use it and provide their feedback. But really, essentially, it's designed as software to enable authors to be able to produce local language materials with no more than 20 hours of training. And we also found that there are organizations and individuals that are just adopting the software and finding it readily, easily available to use. What does the Bloom software provide? Well, it has templates upon which that you could create supplemental reading materials. That's really what it's designed for, not textbook, but supplemental reading materials, local language materials, and that you could reversion it from one language to another. That's another feature. And that you could produce leveled and decodable readers. It's basically a toolkit that authors could use to create a variety of local language materials. We did the first of our in-country pilot workshops in Ethiopia this last January, and found some lessons of experience that we would recommend for those that are interested in using this software or other writing software that may be available. What we found is if you're going to do a language-specific training, to preload the software in effect with your leveled words, according to whatever levels are either dictated by the Ministry of Education or being used in other circumstances. You want to make sure obviously your software is ready to use as well, but also that you have your training material that you could provide, both recommendations to training of trainers, but also to those that will be participating in the workshop. We also found that in some respects, incorporating artists, for example, if you really are looking at a book production workshop, and for early grades, you do want to have graphically attractive material. So we found in a number of the workshops that we've organized around the software, having some presence or opportunity to be able to incorporate graphic elements. And that's, again, one of the features of the Bloom software, that you can incorporate graphic elements. In terms of a global rollout, there's the RFP that Penelope had mentioned as well. The actual date is not May 27th. It's not May 13th. It's now May 27th. In terms of looking for submissions, that we will be funding approximately 8 writers' workshops, both country and language specific. The information for which can be found on the URC website or through the All Children Reading Grand Challenge website as well. We're quite excited to be able to advance title development, and the workshops will include provision. What we want from applicants is to make 200 titles available in both fiction and nonfiction. Further details can be found through the URC website. In general, beyond simply just the workshops for supporting specific language for specific countries, we would love to see basically the Enabling Writers workshops as a community endeavor and a global rollout that a variety of organizations are really looking at. How can they host their own Enabling Writers workshops? So to complement the RFP as well, we'd really be excited to find about other organizations that have downloaded the software at a community level. We've done some university workshops introducing the software as well. You might want to consider themed workshops, maybe around STEM as a topic or gender, just as a way to drive more title development in those areas as well. And we are quite interested in the whole issue of accessibility for special need populations. I would argue both in terms of content, to be able to highlight those types of learners in the material that's developed, but also working with organizations to make sure that these titles are accessible by special need populations. So one example would be outputting your publications in an EPUB format. The second activity that builds upon this is basically having a place that you could put your titles. There are a range of organizations that are working in this space already, and whether it's Africa Storybook or Protham Books or eKitabu or World Reader, there's a combination of organizations that have digital libraries that are either ebooks or print-ready materials. Our main focus primarily for the Global Reading Repository is to have print-ready titles that we can make easily accessible by a variety of intermediaries, not the least of which are ministries of education, donors, and implementing partners on the ground. And so while it's called a global reading repository, it really will be probably a network of global reading repositories, some of which will be titles that are developed by, let's say, organizations like USAID that are supporting. We want to make those accessible. It may be organizations such as SAVE or World Vision. There's a variety of organizations that are working in this space. But ultimately what we want to have is the set of materials made accessible by a variety of users. And that will include both open education resources, but also proprietary content. Obviously, one of our main interests is to make sure that these materials are as accessible as possible. So both for enabling writers to be able to use Creative Commons licensing, but also through the Global Reading Repository to be able to access a variety of materials, we really want to make that as accessible as possible by a variety of users around the world. So we conducted a series of interviews in terms of framing the Global Reading Repository with a variety of organizations. And some of the findings, as I mentioned, were that there's obviously a combination of both open and proprietary content. We love the idea of connecting to both. It really would be, for example, if you do a search and are looking for titles in Hausa, that you could find a variety of platforms that are making that material available, some of which you could download because it's open education resources, and others of which may just be pointing to you to other sources of content. But we, again, want to unlock this opportunity for organizations and individuals to find a variety of local language materials. We know as part of this process, through the Global Reading Repository initiative, is that we want materials to have some quality certification. That's going to be an important part of quality review. So looking through that. We also want to make sure that it's discoverable. So that really would have to do with the variety of metadata that we would use so that different repositories could speak to each other, or you could find material on a single or other repositories. We do know that a primary feature, however, is going to be that it operates in a low bandwidth environment and again promotes access to a variety of learners, including those titles that can be made available to learners with disability. I would say that it's still a work in progress. We are quite excited to find a variety of partners that could work with us on this really important endeavor. You may be a technology platform company providing your technical expertise. If you have content, it may either be available in an existing repository or digital learning site, or, for example, make it available that we can make it discoverable and available through a variety of platforms that we would be exploring. And again, this issue of accessibility. So that was the Global Reading Repository. Briefly, just to conclude, to talk about beyond just material provision, Penelope and Shubha had also mentioned in terms of making those materials available. So as Penelope had mentioned, what we have observed is that there's significant loss in a number of countries in terms of materials being available for audiences. So another prize activity that the All Children Reading Grand Challenge partners have supported is this track and trace software. So I should mention that the prize competition was an interesting vehicle that we were able to use to basically crowdsource a variety of innovations. And the prize model is basically that organizations come forward with concept notes or actually prototypes themselves, upon which we will make determinations about which to fund. So we're really excited that in terms of the track and trace prize competition, we had two winners, Open EMIS, that's supported through the Community Systems Foundation, and the JSI with its product as well. Basically, the features, the main functionality of the track and trace software is light touch again, working in a low resource environment. How can you use a combination of both smart and feature phone and basic phones and barcodes as a way to track and trace the progress of books from basically procurement to receipt on the ground at communities and schools. So we wanted to make sure that it was, again, a technology that could be used in low resource environments. Basically to address 4 questions. What books should arrive at school? When should the books arrive? Where are the books now? And how can I contact the person responsible for the shipment? Those were all important features of the track and trace software. So in some respects, this is a picture of one of the templates that will be involved, that you can have a visual representation of where your books are in the shipment process and provide access to a number of intermediaries in different steps that will have different dashboards that they could review this information. And your text message or your SMS is going to be a primary feature of being able to indicate, ask the questions and receive the information about where the books are. Finally, just to conclude in terms of track and trace, And we'll make these slides available, so I apologize. This is my only slide that I think is word intensive or word heavy. We've done a scoping trip with JSI and CSF to Malawi to be able to lay the groundwork for an ultimate pilot that we'll be doing this summer, and then ultimately then rolling it out both at country levels. And we want to make this software as accessible as possible. And through the process, just like through Enabling Writers, we'll be developing technical training manuals and good practice recommendations for how you could utilize the use of this software. So again, just a contribution overall to the Global Book Fund initiative. There's a variety of other ways that technology might or could be used cost effectively and efficiently. We welcome your suggestions in those regards as well. But these are 3 activities that we're advancing in regards to contributions to the Global Book Fund, and would welcome answering any questions you have in the Q&A portion. Thank you.
So thank you, Tony. We have, again, about 10 minutes for question and answer with Tony about those 3 dimensions of, or 3, I guess, not dimensions, but 3 initiatives or activities related to, as part of that suite around the Global Book Fund, all of them technology-based interventions. Questions have come in.
Sure. So this last question, I don't know to which presenter it's addressed. It was posted by Talia. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. Has the feasibility study been able to map out what other stakeholders are doing in this area? And the second question is, has there been any thought about how the Global Book Fund would engage with these partners, such as Room to Read, who are also tackling some of the challenges in the book chain?
Should we take a few questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is the only question we have so far.
Okay, so maybe we'll tackle that question while encouraging others to please type in your questions so that we are queued up for the next questions. Who would like to answer that about the feasibility of this in relation to the work of other partners, including others who are active in the area like Room to Read and so on?
So I could start and give a general answer about how other stakeholders have been involved, and then Shubha, maybe you could give more detail about how the country case studies and the feasibility study overall looked at other stakeholder engagement. So first of all, in general, there have been many stakeholders and partners involved in the development of the Global Book Fund, including Room to Read, Save the Children, other organizations that have reading programs in many countries. And if there are any of you on the webinar today who would like to attend future meetings, would like to get more information, please do let us know. We've specifically been involved in discussions around ensuring that materials are widely available through the repository. And these other organizations have contributed many ideas and many important thoughts about different principles around the book fund, the way it should be structured, the priorities, the primary audience, and other aspects of how the fund's activities will roll out. Shubha, do you want to talk a little more in a little more detail about the feasibility study?
Sure, thanks, Penelope. I think just to add on a little bit more, as part of our feasibility study, we interviewed a number of stakeholders that are active in this area. So the question was really, how have we mapped out what they're doing? So we interviewed many stakeholders, both at the country level as well as the global level, including Room to Read, Save, Code, etc. And so we spoke to country offices of those different organizations, as well as others with a more global perspective or a more regional perspective on what these implementers are doing on the ground, the challenges they're facing, as well as the opportunities they themselves see for a potential Global Book Fund. And so in our report, you can see examples of what we've been hearing from these different stakeholders. And in our report, we also illustrate some of the activities being undertaken by these different implementers.
Other questions?
Sure. Yeah, we received another question from Jean Bernard. For everyone, have you had experience in enabling writers projects directed at children and young people as authors, illustrators, rather than professional writers.
So there are a variety of, I would almost going to say, just to tack on to the feasibility study, we undertook our own feasibility study for the Global Reading Repository, and there are a variety of organizations that are working in this space already. Africa Storybook, Pratham Books, World Reader, eKitabu, just to name a few. And then you have Daisy Consortium and Benetech as others. So there are a variety of organizations. We're really excited to see the opportunity for writing software to be used to produce local language materials. Microsoft has a package called Chekhov that they're using in classrooms. There are a variety of other platforms. In regards to the RFP specifically through URC that's been issued, we're specifically looking for authorship of titles that can make their way into streams being endorsed by ministries of education and used in classrooms. However, the ecosystem approach that I mentioned as part of also the general rollout is we would be really excited to see a variety of organizations, many of whom are already working in this space already, helping produce an ecosystem of local language materials. I've also often heard Penelope talk about a book flood. We would love to see a variety of titles made available in libraries, in community settings, in homes, in schools, and that will take a variety of authorship. Young people have terrific imagination, and having them engaged in production of materials is a really exciting way for them to reinforce their interest in reading. Also, we have had some experiences through All Children Reading where older learners in a school have written books for younger learners. So it's a great opportunity to get children involved. If you look at your older children or moving up the age range, universities, it's an important opportunity to have universities also involved in this product development. We just conducted a workshop in Indiana University with a really strong program there that does international education, where we were able to introduce the international or the enabling writer software. And we love the idea of connections, for example, between diaspora communities. How can you have them support, let's say, local language material workshops in a country while at the same time learning how to use the software, let's say, in a university in a developed country context? We recently had a Foggy Bottom, there was a TEDx Foggy Bottom presentation that our Christy Vilsack, who's our international education advisor, she gave a TED Talk. And we have a variety of students who attended that event from George Washington University ask how they can get involved as well. So if you have other suggestions, we really do see this as lifting a common effort from a number of organizations trying to create more material development. Having young people engaged in the co-creation process is a great idea.
And I just want to add that we also just signed an MOU with ADEA, the Association for the Development of Education in Africa. And one of the activities that they'll be undertaking is enabling writers' workshops at African universities. And so we're looking how to twin or partner universities in other countries, universities in Africa, to have young people, university students, develop these materials for their communities as well. So we're really excited about that too. Do you want to take one more?
Is there any more questions? No more questions. Okay. So I think now we're going to turn then back to Penelope, and she's going to talk to us about the next steps, including, I think, the next step for the REACH Trust Fund call for proposals, which should be of interest in particular to developing country partners who could participate or apply to receive funding.
Thank you. See, let me get the keyboard. So thanks, Tony and Karen. We're just going to continue for a few minutes talking about the next steps under the Global Book Fund. As I mentioned in my first presentation, we have many ongoing work streams that are running on slightly different timelines with different activities. So I'm going to review some of the major ones and some of the events coming up, and then go into more depth about the call for proposals. So we have several activities that I would call general training or general outreach coming up. And these are meetings or events that will talk about and discuss the Global Book Fund in general and how to advance the Global Book Fund. So if anyone is in Addis or near Addis, we're going to have a training session and discussion of the Global Book Fund there in a couple of weeks. We're also planning a side event in Oslo after the GPE board meetings. We'll have a major event in Washington on September 8th around International Literacy Day, and then there will be several events with ADEA, as I just mentioned. On the title development front, as Tony discussed, the Enabling Writers proposals are due on May 27th. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me or look at the URC website, which is globalreadingnetwork.net. We're also advancing the repository design. If you're interested in that, please let Tony know or contact me and I'll let Tony know. And then we also have assistance available on Creative Commons licensing. This is something that we're working on with the Creative Commons Network, and they have resources available in many countries around the world and also have regional offices as well as staff here in Washington for anyone who needs assistance around licensing, which sounds like a small activity, but is actually quite complex and quite important to ensure access to titles. So then we have around procurement and financing. We are, R4D, I should say, not us. R4D is currently finalizing phase 1 of the feasibility study and will soon be launching phase 2. On supply chain management, we have a workshop coming up in Washington, D.C., which will be on June 6th. And that will look at developing several work streams within supply chain management on quantification, forecasting, product selection, procurement scheduling, and distribution. So again, on June 6th, we will have a track and trace pilot coming up over the summer, probably in July or August in Malawi. And then we'll be rolling out track and trace. So the rollout of track and trace is a little different from the rollout for enabling writers because it requires an actual book procurement. So if you're developing a book procurement or associated with a book procurement and you think it would benefit from having a track and trace element and you would like to help us pilot and improve this software, please let us know and we will match you with a track and trace rollout activity. And then the part that I really wanted to focus on now is the Reach for Reading call for proposals. So Reach is a World Bank managed trust fund for results-based financing that's currently co-funded by the government of Germany, the government of Norway, and USAID. It is now running 20 activities in 16 countries. So any IDA, or I believe it's IDA eligible country is eligible to apply or to host an activity. REACH has 2 different kinds of funding mechanisms. It has country program grants for larger amounts of funding and knowledge, learning, and innovation activities, KLI activities, that contribute to the global evidence base around results-based financing. The next call from the REACH Trust Fund will be Reach for Reading in support of the Global Book Fund. So Reach for Reading will fund a wide variety of activities related to the book chain, to the activities of the Global Book Fund, all the way from title development through title access, procurement and financing, distribution, and use. So the criteria are on the slide. The first one is relevance to Global Book Fund goals, obviously. These activities are intended to support the development of the Global Book Fund concept. The second one is technical soundness. The third one is methodological rigor. There will need to be evaluations along with the intervention so that we can demonstrate proof of concept. Strategic opportunity for long-term engagement. The activities should be conceived of as scalable, sustainable, and part of the system for book purchase and distribution in the country. And the last one is client commitment. And this is extremely important, and this has been a principle of the Global Book Fund from the beginning. We've all seen, and Shubha talked about, how provision does not always equal use. We've seen classrooms, we've seen schools where books are sitting, books are not being used. In many cases, those books are actually inappropriate for the students or not in sufficient quantities, which is why they're not being used. But in other cases, it's because teachers have not received the support that they need in order to be able to integrate their materials into their instruction. So from the very beginning of the Book Fund, we've decided together that books need to go into countries, into programs that are already focused on improving learning, and already committed to having an integrated approach to improving learning. As we've often said, we do not want to send books into the void. We want to send books into classrooms, into the hands of students where they will be used, where students will benefit, and where the country will benefit from the investment. So this is a very important criteria. Luckily, we have many, many countries working on improving learning outcomes now. Just with USAID, we have reading programs in 44 countries. Again, with other partners and with government-led work, there's a lot of overlap. There are many, many options, many, many places where the trust fund can work. So just a few frequently asked questions that we've heard. The World Bank has opened this call for proposals to a wide range of partners. It's not just a trust fund that can be accessed by World Bank staff, although we certainly hope and encourage World Bank staff to be involved. Proposals can be written by a wide variety of organizations and also by consortia of organizations. And that's what we would really like to see. We would really like to see government-led proposals supported by development partners, supported by NGOs coming together to write a proposal around book fund type activities. The maximum amount per grant for this call is probably going to be $500,000, although that's not final yet. There may also be additional calls coming up over the next couple of years. We are hoping to do a smaller number of larger grants versus a very large number of small grants. These are intended to be large-scale, country-level, system-level activities. In order to manage the funding, a World Bank task team leader will need to be identified for each proposal. Preferably, of course, those submitting a proposal would be working with the TTL in the country. But in countries where there aren't TTLs or countries where for other circumstances that match doesn't work, the team here in Washington, Luis Benveniste and Peter Holland and his team will be working together with those submitting proposals to match them with an appropriate TTL. So these are a few examples of the kinds of things that can be funded through the trust fund that will be funded. Title development, developing technical specifications, improving procurement, financing, market shaping, supply chain development, supply chain management, other results-based financing, book-related work within bank operations, for example. And the trust fund can also fund technical assistance to help develop these activities. So it's not necessarily that you would need to actually fund procurement. If you're not at that stage yet, you could also request technical assistance to help you develop RBF Global Book Fund type procurement. So REACH works at all stages of the policy process. So again, the options for proposals are really quite wide. All the way from upstream policy dialogue, all the way through implementation and evaluation. There's a very wide range of activities that can be supported by the trust fund. So we really hope that we'll receive many proposals. And in terms of getting involved in next steps, we would like to urge you and ask you to please disseminate this information within the country where you work, within your networks, to make sure that the widest possible and the largest possible number of colleagues have this information and can access this funding. And as I said before, just to recap a little bit, other ways you can get involved are the book fund meetings and workshops, enabling writers, the repository, track and trace, and then the trust fund. I would also like to underline, just to close, that the idea behind the Global Book Fund has been that this is a partnership, collegial process built on consensus and discussion, and that everything that's being produced is an open source public good. So the software is available, the studies are available, the materials inventories, everything that's been produced, everything that's been commissioned is an open source public good. So we really hope that that will spur more involvement, because it will take all of us putting our heads together and our energies together to solve this extremely critical problem in our sector. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. We'll take a few more questions before we close. Karen?
Are there any questions that have come in? No further questions.
Oh my goodness, well, we could talk more.
So, Penelope and Tony, I have a question for you,
Yes,
which is,
please.
what kinds of resources could we send out now to GPE partners related to the different items that you've discussed today? I know that one of the critical things would seem to be making sure that GPE partner countries have access to the REACH call for proposals, which we could circulate through our country support team leads as a first point of conveying it on to their counterparts at the country level.
And also through the DCP updates, which is text research.
Sure, and the DCP updates. But that's on the REACH piece.
Mm-hmm.
The track and trace was new to me, and it's separate from the REACH, but it is another call for proposals. So I'm wondering, is there a way we could bundle, because those seem to be the main developing country partner relevant components at this stage where there's an actual call for proposals. Could we bundle that into one sort of document that we could share with people so they could have that information?
Sure. So we could certainly bundle it into one document. The RFPs are on slightly different timelines.
Okay.
So we can send the Enabling Writers RFP to go out now, for example. We can send the REACH RFP as soon as it's, REACH call for proposals as soon as it's ready. And then the track and trace one is going to be slightly later, probably in the early fall.
Okay.
So we can send an overview.
Maybe an overview would be helpful
then,
with the timelines, and then yeah.
I was going to say that we have information 2-page flyers about the Global Reading Repository Track and Trace and Enabling Writers on the All Children Reading website, or rather,
they've already come.
So those that are, we've already.
They will be shared as a follow-up.
As a follow-up, okay.
And for others as well, we'd love to have those disseminated. Actually, what we have is a background study about the Global Reading Repository, and again, the timing for that and the collaboration for that, that's moving along. We would love to have feedback and input from a variety of partners. The Enabling Writers software is available now for people to be able to download through a variety of sources. We will be developing an Enabling Writers toolkit that'll be part of URC offering as well for those that want to do their own workshops. And for track and trace, I think, quite frankly, given the timing of when that's going to be rolled out, we'd love to find out which donor partners are interested in potentially piloting or using the software. And again, as Penelope had said, seeing how we might be able to match that, let's say, with an existing reading program that's online.
And the feasibility study will also come out next week for phase 1. And that will also be widely disseminated and available to anyone who's interested in reading it. But for those of you on the line who want to be sure that you receive all of the updates and might also be interested in the other activities that we and others are doing around reading, do sign up for the Global Reading Network at globalreadingnetwork.net. And that way you'll receive all of the invitations to events and activities as they come up, as well as additional resources that are posted.
Good. So I think with that, unless any questions have come in, I want to say thank you to our colleagues from R4D for your presentation. And Shubha, that was very, given the size of the report, which I still don't know, that was very nicely summarized, I might say. And we will make sure that that's available to everyone who participated in the webinar. Thank you for that, and for the fine work in the report itself, and thank you for our friends and colleagues from USAID for coming over and presenting the full suite of activities. And for all of you who have joined us, this has been actually a pretty successful technological experience, I think. And just to let you know that this is one of a series of webinars that GPE will be hosting over the course of the next year, and you will receive further information about those. But thank you for your patience as we pilot the technology. You are our, so to speak, first guinea pigs in terms of trying to figure out how this can work. And we would also welcome any comments or feedback you might like to send us about the quality of the experience, because we're very much in pilot mode trying to figure out how to best engage with partners using digital technology. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day or evening.
Great, thank you. Bye.